Begin the current Daf Mesechtes Nedarim Daf Ayin Gimel. Begin 3 lines down at the top of the Amud, where the Gemara continues with the discussion from the previous Daf regarding this halacha of V'isha Yikemena V'isha Yiferena, regarding if the halacha of the hafara is B'shama Isha Dafkahu. Again, it's Rami Bar Chama, the same Amoira who asked the question on the beginning of the Gemara in the previous Amud, that when the husband is coming to be mefer, it says V'shama Isha. So the question was, is that Davka? Does he have to actually hear it or not? The Gemara did not resolve the question, although the Ran did point out that from our Gemara now we're going to prove the answer to that question. The Gemara continues on that. Imtim Tzalaimer, what's halacha going to be with a cheresh who cannot hear? What's halacha going to be with him if he's going to be able to make for a neder or not? Shis correspondent b'chazich in the Cheskel turn to Daf Chaim. Pisham joining for today's daf. Something that's discussed in today's daf, like we mentioned, a cheresh, someone who is deaf but not mute. What's halacha could he be made for the neder for his wife? Another question we have is a Baal, which is a similar type of question. It's not the same context about Bishama, but is Baal Masha Yafal L'shtei Nasha B'vas Achas? Could a husband be made for his two wives Nedarim at the same time? There's another word in the pasuk that would seem to indicate 1 versus 2, which actually relates to the halacha of Imashkin Shtei Soitis Ka'achas, which actually have a disagreement regarding why that halacha is, but you're not allowed to give two suspected adulterous women the drink of the Saita at the same time. We'll see how that relates to the halachic question of being made for the Nedarim of the two wives at the same time. Also, the Gemara introduces for the next Mishnah the machlokes Rabbi Lezer v'Chachamim regarding Higiyas Mana, when there was a certain date that they put in place that we are engaged already for a long time, halachic engagement. They already gave the ring, and then we have to get married. If they don't get married, so there's machlokes Rabbi Lezer v'Chachamim Baila made from the Diraha. If the husband could be made for, could nullify the Nedarim, because since there's a chiyuv of feeding her already, so he could he even be made for the Nedarim or not? Which that also relates to another, at least the Gemara attempts to relate it, to Machlekes Mishnah Rishon Mishnah Achroni regarding Higiyas Mana Chilas B'Truma, which is when the time already comes, let's say 12 months, whatever it is, that it's time for the husband to feed her, even though they didn't get married. Could she even go ahead and eat Truma or not? That's Machlekes, and the Gemara is going to attempt to connect that and say that maybe that's not necessarily the case of this Machlekes Rabbi Lezer Chachamim regarding if, when it's Higiyas Mana, if the husband can be made for the Nedarim or not. Now, one of the ideas that come up in that discussion is kol nederes al das baili nederes, that when a woman takes a neder, she does it with the intention of the consent of her husband, and we'll see how that relates to, is that considered that they're married, or even if they're not. And and the concept that comes up also in that discussion is kalero lebila im bila makebes boy, but v'chol she'ein ro lebila bila makebes boy, which is an interesting halacha, which is that the menachos, you don't have to necessarily mix it together. So although it talks about mixing, it's not ma'akev. But when it talks about if you have 61 srainim of flour, you have to have 60 in one bucket and one in another one so that you can mix it. So the Gemara there asks, what do you mean? I thought you don't have to mix it. Yes, but it has to be, it's called ro'ul labila. It has to be fit to mix. Then it's not ma'akev. If it's not fit, then it is ma'akev, which is a very interesting concept. But that we have that by women going to the mikvah, that regarding chatzitzes, even though it's not going to be, the water's not coming in between the teeth, but it has to be able to come. And therefore, you have to make it that type of situation. Although it doesn't have to, but it has to be able to. And that's the halacha of ro'ul labila. And one final related halacha is midaraisa. And the Rusa is the chelas b'truma. Really, it's kinyan kaspai. When the woman gets engaged, there is already, the kinyan of kedushin already took effect. But rabbinically, we say she cannot have truma until they get married. And the reason for that is one of two reasons. Either because shemet tashkal achel achoisa, the kala, the chassan comes and brings over this truma drink of wine, and the brothers are going to say, oh, what did the chassan give you, what did the chassan give you, and what can we have? And mishum simfon, which is they weren't intimate yet, and he might find some type of flaw. He's like, I didn't know this, and whatever. It turns out she was not really, it was a mekach toys. It turns out she was a zar, and she was eating truma inappropriately, so therefore, rabbinically, we don't let her have truma until they actually get married. So we begin the current Daf Ayin Gimel, 3 lines down at the top of the Amud, Ba'iram B'chama, because Ramon B'chama on the previous Daf had asked a prior question. He wanted to know, Ma'u sheyefa b'lei shmiya, can a husband or a father nullify a neder without actually hearing it, like the Ran had explained? Sheyefal ala safik, he'll be made for it. The question was, do we say b'shama isha is dafka who, or, and so he has to actually hear it, or lav dafka? And the Gemara now is going based on like an imtim tzalaima. Let's say you're going to say that the husband could be made for without hearing it, but cheresh, regarding, which Ran explains, Tomat, that he could speak, he just doesn't hear. Now, meaning he's not like someone that's considered emboy das. What's the halacha could he nullify his wife's Nedarim? So what is the question? So like we're saying, it's an imtim dilemma. If you're going to say, based on the prior question of Chama, that a Baal Meifa B'lei Shmiya, yeah, the husband does not have to hear it. He can be Meifa, we're not hearing it. But Mishum de Bar Mishmahu, because he's someone that could hear. And since he's fit, he's what's called Ro Lishmaya. So Shmiya is not Ma'akabim. It's not critical for him to hear it. But by someone who's deaf, to La Bar Mishmahu, which he can't even hear, then maybe he'll say, Haina de Rabbi Zera. That's a teaching of Rabbi Zera. What the Rabbi Zera says, Kol haro labilo, whatever is fit for mixing, you technically could mix it, it's not too thick of a consistency, then ain't bila ma'keves boy. Then you actually, it's not critical, you don't even have to do the mixing. But if it's not fit to be mixed, then actually what interestingly is, then bila ma'keves boy, which like we mentioned as my Likutei Rashi, and the side brings from Rashi, Mesech Zivamis, that brings from the Gemara Menachos Daf Kav Gimel Beis, that the Mishnah there teaches if someone says I'm going to bring 61 Esrei in my flour, he has to bring 61 vessel and another one another vessel. And the Gemara explains because the Rabbanan know that you can only mix it together 60 in one, but 61 won't be mixed well. And the Gemara says, what do you mean? But you learned in the Mishnah Daf Yudches that if you didn't do Belila, it's kosher. So Zera answers, this is the principle that's mentioned many times in Shas. If it's fit for mixing, then you actually don't have to do the mixing. And even if you don't mix, it's going to be kosher. But if it's not fit for mixing, then the mixing is ma'akiv because it needs to be at least roll labila. You have to be able to fulfill at least the technical likatchila of the mitzvah of mincha, which is to mix it. And therefore that's the same thing for the charesh, which, yes, you don't have to hear, but you have to be able to hear. Or maybe no. When it says V'shama Isha Loy Ma'akiv, no, it's just like the Ran that said in the previous daf. It's just saying the way normally a guy hears, and therefore he's made for. But you don't have to hear it. You have to be able to hear it, and therefore a Cheresh would be able to do it. That's the Gemara's question. So Amar Rabbi says Tashma, bring a raya. It says in the Braisa, the pasuk says V'shama Isha, her husband is going to hear. It says the Braisa Prat LeEishes Cheresh. That excludes the wife of a deaf person who he is not included in V'shama Isha. He can't hear. Shema Mina says the Gemara. So we have proof from here that the cheresh cannot be made for the nedarim of his wife. Now, the Ran just points out, and this is on the first of the widest lines. He says, although we can't really resolve the question the Gemara had previously answered from this brisa, because seemingly you could make a diak. Say, b'shama isha, her husband's going to hear. So we're excluding the wife of a cheresh. So say, from the fact that the Brisa picked the case of a cheresh, sounds like that, but where he could hear, he has hearing, then hearing is not going to be ma'akiv. So the Ran is asking, the Gemara left off on the previous question, didn't answer it, we're just going based on the Imtan Salema. Why can't you be medayik and say, only a cheresh you're excluding, but a regular person who could hear should be included? He says, no, not true. You could reject and say, maybe the Brisa is just picking the norm, that when we want to give an example of who didn't hear, it's a cheresh who can't hear. But maybe it would apply even by regular husband. Because if you don't say this, says the Ran, then the Gemara previously, why didn't it result? He's proving from his question. Why didn't the Gemara prove from this brisa that you see that a husband that didn't hear could be made for it? Obviously, because he says you can reject, like rejected. That's classic Rishonim, you medayik from your question that they didn't say this. That obviously it wouldn't be a good raya. Now, that would be hearing.
So even if you say Ksiva could dibba on it, but since it's a Shoma.
Would that be medayik that you're saying that the writing would not be a good way of neder, or just?
In this case, that writing would not work.
Is that maybe it would be, but he wouldn't have the hearing. You have to know. Maybe if Ksiva would be kedibba, it would be a neder, but he still wouldn't be able to be made for.
It
Would be. Yeah, right. Unless you say no, maybe.
I'm talking about.
Right, his hearing, that wouldn't be included. That seeing is like hearing, To enunciate it. Yeah.
The neder she made but when she wants to tell him about it.
I mean for him.
She wrote it down.
Right. To hear about it. Right. Right. Would we say that's considered hearing about it? Or no, you have to actually have the audible, hearing of it. Right, yeah.
Because a saita would also be applicable, because even if he hears, he's not really hearing.
What do you mean saita by...
Here, in this case. He can physically hear, but he's not
Who by the who by?
Sota.
I mean cherish. I mean like the.
Cherish of the cotton, right? So a sota would not be able to shama properly.
I mean understanding. Yeah, you have to know. You have to know what. Yeah, sometimes shama means understanding, but it seems like the Gemara over here understands it in the literal sense. It just the only question is dafka or lav dafka. For some reason, the Gemara is not entertaining that it means not understand. Because yeah, right. This cherish the Ram points out is not a shaita. He's not. He's able to speak. So that's not considered the shaita. So. The Gemara doesn't entertain why that shama means understanding. It means that like he actually hears it because in a way we are talking about the physiological speaking and hearing versus like understanding concept. Yeah, right. Right. That's what I'm saying. Cherish in the one who does not have the consciousness is not intelligent. That's the one who's ein medaber ein shemea. But here. Yeah, exactly. Right. So he is an intelligent person. He would be able to be mefer, but but he can't because of this gzeres hakasab of v'shama isha. Now, but even so, says Duran, even though you cannot prove from this case to answer our previous Gemara's question, he says, but since Rami Bar Chama was saying im timtza loymar that a husband can be mefer without hearing it, that itself, generally the way the Rambam paskins, that itself shows that we hold like that from saying im timtza loymar that. And moreover, that we're relying on Reb Zera's teaching to exclude a cheresh because we see only because he's not ro labila, therefore it's going to be ma'akiv. But sounds like that a regular husband that is ro would be able to. So it sounds like that we do hold like that. And additionally, he says that l'maisa we resolved from all those rayas we brought in the previous daf, and although we rejected it, that was just like kol shinu dechika. And I'm saying, but if you take the flow of it, it definitely sounds like. And that's how he brings from the Rambam. The Rambam paskins that a husband does not actually have to hear about it. He could just be mefer outside a suffix. It's just a cheresh who we're excluding, because he's not even ro'u for hearing, and therefore he's excluded from that. Now, a similar type of a question says the Gemara Ibaylu, because it's based on also how to read the pasuk if it's dafka or lav dafka. Baal ma'o sheyafal l'shtei nashim b'as achas. What's halacha? Could have a husband be made for his two wives Nedarim at the same time. So if they both took a neder, and he's going to say, Mufa l'chayin, your Nedarims are nullified. What's the question? So when it says in the pasuk, Oisa, it says, B'yom shemaya isha, on the day that her husband hears, Yoni Oisa, he'll hold her back. So is that dafka, which that's in the singular, has to be her? I love dafka, or is it not exact? Which Duran just points out, this that we're asking regarding the husband, similar would be regarding the father and his two daughters. It also says Oisa. So the question is that dafka or lav dafka? Mitzvahs, you say in the mitzvah first Nadarim, chavilas. I hear. Is that ma'akiv even? Even if let's say you shouldn't, is that ma'akiv? I'm saying it would be. If you did the hafara, would it be a valid hafara? Even if you say mitzvah chavilas, if you do it, it's going to be hafara. So the question is, would it be hafara? Or the pasuk says no, dafka has to be one. If you do two, it's not going to work. Some Ravina says, Tashma, say, come to bring a raya from another halacha, which will relay back. The Brisa says, Ein mashkin shtei soitis ka'achas. The suspected adulterous woman, who if there's kinu stira, and then she has to go out and drink this drink in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, says the Brisa, you cannot make two women drink at the same time, because sometimes her friend actually was not mezana. She was mezana. But when she sees the other woman saying, I am pure, she's going to become defensive, this woman, and she's not going to want to admit because she's going to feel intimidated from the other woman. And then we're going to erase God's name that was written in sanctity in vain. And therefore, we don't make them drink at the same time. You do separate processes, different procedures. One should not be drinking at the same time as the other one. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo min Hashem huzeh. Says that's not the reason why they said that two saitis cannot drink at the same time because liba gas bechaverta. El mishum shenem because it says the pasuk in Mamid, but it says vehishka mitamapik hey. All those people that say in the davening with the beseicha, you have to this is a mapik hey da was mezuk dazoy steht nicht, right? The mapik hey is telling you something. A mapik hey, which is actually very important when balkai or whatever, it's a very different word as is well known. A mapik hey vehishka is v'hishka oisa. It's like it's not right. V'hishka is drinking, but with a mapik hey, it's saying her drinking. So it's a very different word, b'chlal. So that word with a mapik hey is telling you oisa levada. She should be drinking, and only her, and not another one. Now, interestingly, the Ram brings, what are we proving from this brisa? It says actually different opinions. There are those who want to say that Ravina, right? Ravina was bringing this brisa. Says, I'll answer the question. Is Oisa Davka or not? He quoted this brisa. So one pshat has it that he's proving from the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan make it sound like Oisa is not Davka. Because what's their reason that they give why two women don't drink at the same time? Is because liba gas bechaverta. So you see from the Rabbanan, not like Rabbi Huda, that the mapik hey is not going to tell me, when it says v'hishka, which v'hishka is not going to tell me you can't have two at the same time. Oh, so then you see a husband could be made for his two wives at the same time. That's what you see from the Rabbanan. And that's how he says you see in the Tosefta, in the Sugya, and that's how some want to say. But he says the Ramban does not hold like that. And the reason for that is because in the first parak in Seid Daf Chesed Amud Aleph we say that who's the Tanakama? Tanakama is Reb Shimon. Now, Reb Shimon is what's known, he's Darish time of the crop. He explains, when he gives reasonings and rationales, it's not his Egin Svara. He's saying, I'm going to tell you what the Torah was coming to say. Meaning, when the Torah says oisa, meaning v'hishka, that she should drink, which is oisa levada, let me tell you what the Torah was saying, why he was saying that. Because libegas bechaverta. So says the Ramban, you see, according to everyone, we are darshaning oisa. And it brings a right from Yomei Daf Mem Gimel, where we also say oisa dafka, where we say over there you cannot shech two paras at the same time because it says oisa and not oisa beschaverta. You see, everyone agrees to this type of a drasha, that when it says in the singular, it means only one and not two. Oh, so since we see that oisa is dafka, so he says we don't care about what it says over there in Tosefta, which he said that you see like those who want to say like that, because maybe it's mistaken and it's not in the Brisa B'chir and Rebbeisha. So therefore, comes out that no, you could not be made for your two wives at the same time according to everyone. So to the contrary, Ravina is actually proving from the Rabbanan that Oisa would be Dafka. So that's the Machlekes Rishonim that the Ran brings. When you're looking at the Rabbanan, who they're the Rav, do you see that it's Lav Davka? Because they don't say the reason of a Hishka, and they say a new reason of Libigas Bachaverta. So you see the Oisa is Lav Davka. You see without the Svar of Libigas Bachaverta you would be allowed to. Or that no, Reb Shimon was Dorish time of the Gra, and they're coming based on the Hishka, which is Oisa Lavada. And everyone agrees to that principle, and therefore actually you would not be able to be made for the two wives in the Dharma at the same time. What? No, there's no Machlekes. Reb Shimon, Machlekes in the Saitas. So that's Bechlal, when Reb Shimon is Dorish time of the Kra, as we find by the Mashkin of an Almana, Reb Shimon is Dorish time of the Kra, he tells, I'll tell you why you cannot go ahead and take a Mashkin from Almana, because what's going to happen is that you're going to come and people are going to suspect, what's the man that came to do the Almana, Frau, Spet Banacht, what's he in sei? You know? Reb Shimon says that's the reasoning. Now there's nafkaminas, because if that's the reason, when it's not applicable because she's a wealthy woman, she doesn't need a bag, then you're allowed to. That's only because of the reasoning. So that's where it ends up being a machlekes, but it's still based on the same principle of the halacha of the pasuk. And the Ran says that yes, it appears to be like the Ramban, because definitely the pashtus of Isa is that's dafka, and we find this in the last parak in the Daf Pevam Mabez. The Mishnah says if his wife took a neder and he thinks his daughter took a neder, so the Gemara says, is that to say that when it says Yoni Isa is dafkahu, which means to say that you have to know which one took a neder, and he says, and that's how the Gemara comes out. So you see the Ois is dafka, that you have to be made for this one, and if you made a mistake, you thought it was the daughter, it was the mother, the mother's the daughter, it's not going to work. Now, he says, unless you're going to say, which is interesting chilik that he makes, that when we say Ois is dafka, is regarding knowing who took the neder. But regarding Ois levada, maybe lav dafka, whatever hair splitting chilik the Ran's making. We'll see this on the Sugya da Pevav, but when it says Yoni Oisa, it means you have to know who her. You have to know whose neder you're being made for. If you made a mistake, you thought the mother, your wife, made the neder, and really it was your daughter, which you're able to be made for either one of them. The Gemara says no, because it says Oisa. So Ran says, you see from the Gemara on Daf Pevav that it's dafka, you have to know which one. It says unless you want to make a chilik, depends what Oisa. the isa of the identity versus the isa of one. That's two different isas, and maybe that would be lav dafka. But he says that's the halacha, and he wants to say also, just like a man cannot be made for his two wives at the same time, so too also he's not allowed to be mekayim both of them at the same time, because the sugya later on sounds like that just like the isa that says by hafara is dafka, so too when it says hakama is dafka, and he says like on the right later on. So again, just like he cannot be made for both at the same time, he was not be able to be mekayim both at the same time. No, it wouldn't do anything, right? Because it's not the shtetin pasik isa and isa is dafka, and if you do two, it wasn't isa, and therefore it's not going to do anything. Yeah, it's not going to be hafara. Here in the Amid Beis, where the Gemara continues again with this topic of this parak of Naima Rasa regarding the hafara of this Naima Rasa, of this engaged Naira. So the Mishnah tells us, if you have a girl that's already 12 and a half and she already waited 12 months from when she got engaged, which, as the Ram points out, we already explained in the Gemara of Ayin Beis that it's not really one case, actually two cases. Begeres, kama, because there's only 30 days. And or Naira that waited 12 months, or Va'amana Lamed a widow 30 days. Rabbi Eliezer says, since the husband has to feed her, and this we learned in the Mishnah in Ksubas Daf and Zayin and Aleph, that we give a Besula 12 months, and afterwards the chassan has to start feeding her. As the Mishnah teaches over there, if it already reached the time and they didn't get married, yeah, so she could start eating from his estate. So says Rabbi Eliezer, since the husband has to feed her, if she takes a neder, yafer. Now, of course, yafer would mean the whole Naimer we said that the chassan is mefer. Nobody has to mefer with the father. Now that he has to feed her, he could do the hafara himself, even though she's a naira, without the partnership of the father, because it's like as if they got married, where the chassan takes over control and he himself will be mefer the nadar. That's it. Yeah, the father will be out of the picture of the hafara of the nadarim. The father obviously is not out yet because they didn't get married, but for the hafara, the father is out. Now, v'chachamayim, and the sages, they say, which the Ran says it's Rabbi Yeshua, who usually is the one that disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer. Throughout Shas, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, which the Gemara on the side of Nois Aleph says that, we'll see later on Daf Ayin Dalma Beis, next Daf, in the Ran, where he's actually going to be busy with this, is it Rabbi Yeshua or not, because we're going to seemingly have a contradiction in Rabbi Yeshua, but whoever the Chacham are, they say that no. In Abal Mefer, that the husband cannot do Afara, until she enters into his domain. Kanisa always connotes chuppah. No, until you have Nesuin, he cannot do it himself. He is still a partner with the father. That's the machlekes in our Mishnah. Now, Amar Rabbi says, this Rabbi Eliezer that we have in our Mishnah, and Mishnah Rishayna, which is a different halacha that we're going to compare, in contrast to the Mishnah Achrayna, those two, Amar Davar Echad, they're saying the same thing. What does that mean, the same thing? The same basic idea, that when it comes the time for them to get married, and they didn't get married, since the husband has to start feeding her, so we consider her as married for some halachas, even though she's not even in her husband's house yet. Rabbi Eliezer is the halacha of our Mishnah, that he says in the Mishnah that the husband can be made for Nedarim by himself, without the partnership of the father. So it's like as if she's married because he has to feed her. And then we have the halacha of the Mishnah Rishayna, which is what? It's not like we learn the Mishnah in Masechet Ksubas. The Mishnah says, we give the girl, the virgin, 12 months, to prepare herself for her wedding. Once it's already 12 months, she could eat from his food, meaning he has to feed her, and she could even eat truma, even though she's not even married to him yet, if he's a kain. Now, yavam, and this is not really so much important, but this is what the Mishnah is, so we quote the whole thing. But the yavam, which is if his brother, the chassan, died without any children, and now he's a yavam to the kala, he cannot feed her truma, as the Gemara learns out over there in Daf Nun Ches and Ksubis, because the Torah says kinyan kaspoy. It has to be the acquisition of his money, and this is not his kinyan, it's his brother's kinyan, as a yavam. So he's not going to feed her truma. And even says the Mishnah, Asa shish chadoshim b'fnei abal. If, let's say, she had been engaged with her chassan 6 months, and then the chassan had a tragic accident and he passed away, from those 12 months that the chacham would give her, from the moment that the husband says, let's get married, and the remaining 6 months were with the yavam, again engaged, and even let's say she literally was almost by the year when they had made up that they're going to get married. chassi yom echad, except one day, which was the day before she was supposed to get married. Our chassan had an accident and died, and then the yavam takes over. Now, the Ran points out that's the ikar girsa, that yom echad was b'fnei hayavam. Rashi in Ksubis says, no, it's lav davka chassi yom echad. He says, even if she had been 12 months with the chassan, and now the yavam is here, he didn't do yibum yet, but he's like the yavam that she's engaged to, he would not feed her, because it says kinyan kaspai, and it's not kinyan kaspai, it's a kinyan of his brother. We saying chassi yom echad. That's only because the Mishnah wants to tell us a case when the woman did not eat at all, because if she had made it through the year, she would have eaten 1 day, 2 days, whatever it is, until the tragic accident, she would have eaten from her chassan's truma. We wanted to give a case that she didn't eat at all. But the Ran says Rabbeinu Tam does not hold like this. He holds, no, it's dafki if chassu yom echad. But if, let's say, she had made it the 12 months with her chassan, she actually would eat the truma from the yavam, because although the yavam cannot be machal, but he cannot make her lose because of him, and since she was already allowed to start eating truma from the husband's estate, she's not going to stop now that the yavam takes over. And that's how it's explicit in the Yerushalmi. So Machlekes Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, if this wording of chassu yom echad is davka or not. But now the Mishnah continues. Or let's say, which this is what's called zu ve'ein tzarich lemazu. This is definitely not going to eat. But let's say the chassan died a day in. He said, in the year from now we'll get married, and the next day he dies. So kul mifnei hayavim. So all the 12 months were with the yavam chassu yom echad, except for one day which she had done with the chassan. Whatever it is, either way, any one of these cases, says the Mishnah, she's not going to eat truma zu Mishnah Rishayna. This is the first version of the Mishnah, which held that a woman could eat truma before she comes to chuppah, which was after 12 months. We were just saying, but the yavam is not going to be like that because it's not kinyan kaspai, fine. But Bezdin Shalach Harei Amru, the later Bezdin, they came along and they said that no. A woman cannot eat truma until you actually have chuppah and get married. Now, what's the reason for the Mishnah Achrayim? So the Gemara there explains for one of two reasons. Either because of what's called simfoin, in other words, he might find a blemish by her. Gets married, you don't see what's going on, and then he's like, mekach tais, I would never have done such a thing. Now, it comes out retroactively that means this girl was a zara. She was being oiva chiv karis every time she ate from the chassan's truma. That's one reason why we don't let her have when they're engaged. Yes, mekach tais. Or because he might give her a cup of truma, and then her brothers and the sisters are going to say, oh, can we have? And they're zarim for sure, because they're not kinyan kaspa. Well, it's mekach tais. It was never marriage. Mekach tais is a mistake. It wasn't a marriage.
She could marry another coin.
Yeah. Yeah, it was never. I mean, well, if it's not a zayin or whatever, depends how you hold. But yeah. Now, there are certain girsayis the Ram brings, whatever. But we have a girsa now. Now, obviously, this is what Rab is trying to say. Obviously, that the Mishnah Rishayna holds like Rebbe Eliezer. Once the husband is chayiv in the mezayin, it's already 12 months. She's a little bit already like in her husband's domain, and therefore the Mishnah Rishayna says she could eat truma. Now, the Gemara at this point assumes that if the Mishnah Rishayna did not hold like Rebbe Eliezer, even though the Issa Truma by a Kala is only rabbinically, because like we said, really, midaraisa, it's kinyan kaspa already once they get engaged, but we're geyser, again, like we said, either because of simfain or because she might give her brothers and sisters to drink from the Truma. Even so, if not for the fact that by something daraisa, she would be in her husband's domain like Rebbe Eliezer, then for Truma also, even though it's rabbinic, we would not say that she's in his domain. Why? Because the Ran's Bavar in Shayla says, how are you saying the same thing? This is a rabbinic law, because B'deraisa she's allowed to have Truma, even by engagement. So what are you proving that he gives man of Nisu, like it's like Rebbe Eliezer halacha? Rebbe Eliezer is talking about Nedarim, which are Deraisa. What are you comparing to here, which it's only rabbinically a prohibition, because Deraisa you're allowed to have once you're engaged? He says, no, because Chacham Asa Chizek the Brem Kishal Tarsa. The Gemara is assuming that if the Mishnah Rishon did not hold like Rebbe Eliezer for even the Deraisa, they get the halacha, that it's already in the Rishon, they would never have allowed her to have Truma, even though it's a rabbinic prohibition. So Rabbi wants to say that it's the same halacha, that they're both saying the same thing of a Gizman and Nisu, she's already like somewhat married, and therefore again, two halachas, the Mishnah says the husband can be made and done by himself, even though not married yet, and the Mishnah says she could eat Truma. However, Abaye says, no, maybe this is not the case. And he's going to make a chilik both ways to say, I could show you how one would hold, not of the other ones. Why? Ad kan like Kashmi in the Mishnah Rishayna. Where do we find our what's called the first version of this Mishnah Ksubis that holds that once it's already 12 months, it's like they're married. That's elamechel betruma. That's only for this kala to be able to eat truma, which is dirabanan, like we explained. This halacha of a kala eating truma is only issa dirabanan. Like we said, either because of simcha, they might find a blemish, or because of she might come to give her brothers to drink. So whenever he's chayv in our mezainis, we don't have to be concerned for that. Why not? So the Ran explains, first of all, there's no concern really of simcha anymore, because if he's feeding her, so before he feeds her, he has his relatives check her out in the bathhouse, so that he shouldn't be throwing his money out for nothing. And, or even not in the bathhouse, a bedika's chutz, a shma bedika, he has her check her out.
That was also Yevama.
Yeah, so we had seen this Gemara before Ksubis, Nun Ches. So first of all, he has her checked out. So we're not really concerned about a blemish. And second of all, because of Shem Tashka, it was not a problem, because if I'm feeding her, if you give someone food and, the family's around, you're not going to want to give her, Uber Eats, because then the whole family's going to eat, and then you're going to have to give more. It's going to be a $700 lunch, whenever you give her food. So he makes a designated place for her. Oh, so there's no problem, Shem Tashka. So that would make sense why the Mishnah Rishon would hold that when it says Higiyaz Mana, that he can feed her Truma. But regarding the Dam, which is the Iraisa, biblically a Chasna cannot be made for by himself, even after he's Chayv Mezainis, because what happened to the father? Emalai. I would say that no, he cannot be made for without the Shutfas of the father. So don't prove to me, says Abaye, that like what Rabbi wanted to say, that the Mishnah Rishon holds like the Rebbe Eliezer. No. Because, there's only specifically by this rabbinic law, which anyways, we don't even have these concerns anymore, really, once he gives manla, as the Ran explained, versus Nadam, of course, he wouldn't be able to make on his own. And I can tell you the other way, says Abaye. V'ad kan le'ishamet le'lid Eliezer, and where do we find Rebbe Eliezer in our Mishnah that's saying once it's already 12 months, she's already in his domain? That's Ella Gabin Nedarim. That's only regarding nullifying her vows. Not because it's like she's considered as married. In other words, regarding the laws of Truma, of course, he would not hold we could say that he would not hold like the Mishnah Rishayna. No, she cannot eat Truma. So why could he be made on the Nadarim? That's because based on the principle of Kedira Pinchas Mishmei Derava, that he says that the Amar Kol Nederes, whoever takes a vow, Al Das Bailehi Nederes, it's with her husband's intent that she takes the vow. So therefore, Rebbe Eliezer holds that since he's supporting her, for sure she's taking the vow based on his intention. But because he's feeding her, not because she's married to him. So it's like a condition in the Nedarim, but not because she's in his domain. Of a truma, but regarding truma, even when it's rabbinic prohibited truma, no, she cannot eat, because you could say, because although that he's supporting her, you still have to be concerned with simfan, because they hold bedika's chutz loishma bedika, which means that he's going to tell his sister-in-law to go check out his kala, but she's only going to see her at a wedding, and she's all dressed up and beautiful, and okay, that's not enough. He doesn't know if it's titzachintin, what I'm saying, he's going to get married, he's going to lahadam, it's mekech tois. And also for Shemitashka, there is a concern, because he doesn't make a designated place for her, and she doesn't always go there anyways, and she brings some other doggy bags home, and so you could say that that Rebbe Eliezer would not hold like the Mishnah Rishayna. Now, one final point. The Ran says that we're saying that the reasoning of Rebbe Eliezer is like Rav Pinchas. That's what we're saying. Rebbe Eliezer is like Rav Pinchas, so don't tell me you would hold like the Mishnah Rishayna. Says the Ran, it's not to say that the Rabbanon don't hold like Rav Pinchas, because the Gemara comes out clearly in Mesechtes Nidab and Vav Med Aleph by a minor that her mother and her brothers marry her off, that her husband can be made for her Nedarim. Now, wait a second. Nedarim, if you're over 11 years old and you're still a katana, you're not yet an adult, you're Nedarim biblical. That's what's called mufla samach le'ish, as the Gemara explains over there. Now, the marriage of a minor, when she's 11 and a half, is only rabbinic. And even so, we say that rabbinic marriage, the husband could go ahead and nullify the Nedarim of hers, which are deraisa. And the Gemara says, and why? Based on the principle of Rav Pinchas, because al das bailehi nederes. So says the Ran, obviously we see the Rabban agree to it. So how are we explaining that Rabbi Eliezer halacha is based on this principle of Pinchas as if the Rabbanan don't? No, it says the Ran like this. Machlokes says as follows. Rabbi Eliezer holds, since he's supporting her, so she's only going to make the Nedarim with his intent. But Rabbanan hold that, wait a second, don't you agree to us that if, let's say, someone else would be supporting her, a friendly neighbor, she wouldn't be making her Nedarim on that neighbor's intent? So when the chassan is supporting her, it's also not adas the chassan that she's taking the neder until she comes into the chuppah. But yeah, once she has chuppah and she gets married, even by a rabbinic chuppah, like a minor that her mother and her brothers marry her off, then the Rabbanan would agree, as the Gemara says in Nida, that yes, aldas bailehi nederes. And that's why the rabbinic marriage could come along and mivatl the neder deraisa, not because of mivatl, but because then you'll have aldas bailehi nederes, because they had already had chuppah. But a chassan is like a neighbor, and if a neighbor supports you, you're neder, not based on whoever supporting you. Now, what Duran does get into interesting conversation is that he says there are those who want to learn from this halacha that if someone takes a neder aldas chaveroi, I'm taking a neder that my friend Shmuel is gonna be pleased with my neder. So someone to say, okay, that person can be mated the neder without going to the chacham, just like we say over here. And the reason why the husband can be made for it himself, even though it's an aimorasa, which, you have to have a via bailam mafid nederah, no, because she's taking the neder al daite, where, so when you also say that you're doing al das chaveroi, that person could also be made for it because it's not any worse when you say that you're doing it because your friend Shmuel should be happy than the stomach of the Baal, which is the whole reason over here. And that it's like taking a neder al t'nai. That's how some want to learn that from this sugya. Says the Ran, the zu etzli shigigas hayra. Says this to me is a mistaken psak. Why? He has an interesting lumdus. Says even though the Gemara is saying al das bailehi nederes, even though they're not even married, even so, it has to be a Baal, a chassan, they will be made for in a certain wording that the Torah gave, which is Xeris HaKasav. And therefore, as we'll see later on, the Vayin Beis, the husband can't just say any words. There has to be specific words that go into the halacha of hafacha. Now, if you're going to say that this halacha of being neider would work even al das chaveroi, that guy could also be made for it, because it's like a neder al t'nai, it's like a stipulation. So wait a second. Then the heter of the husband and some other person should be appropriately to be said in any wording. Why is the Mishnah later on limiting us to certain words? It should be like al t'nai. Says the Ran, no, most definitely what Reb Pinchas is saying, that although the hafara of the husband is Xeris HaKasav, and however, but the reason why the Torah gave the right specifically to the Baal to be made for the Nedarim is because al das bailehi nederes. So therefore, whenever she's being nederes al daitari, his words are very interesting. He says, Chayla ha'gzeres ha'kasav da'amar rachman. Then the Gzeres ha'kasav is going to take effect that he could be made for it. But someone taking a neder al das chaveroi, you can't be mechadish what the Torah never said. For sure, that person cannot be made for. Now, the Ran does say, however, if the person explicitly stipulates and says, you're making a tanai, of course, then Yechava could be mattered, and you don't have to have any distinct wording. And whatever the guy says, I'm not pleased, that would be enough, even though for hafar that wouldn't be effective, as we're going to see later on Ayin Chesam and Aleph, but that was because you would say explicit tanai. But this whole halacha is specifically for Xeris HaKasav of Baal. It's just that you need also al das Baal Nederes. Then it's going to be just him, whether it be the neder of a katana with the rabbinic marriage that the rabbanan made, or when you have a naimer rasa, which generally you need the husband, you need the father also. But when the segi is manbeli nisu, and then it's already he's feeding me, so al das Baal Nederes. Then it's going to be that this halacha is going to be that it can be made for. But again, it's still gebayt on the Xeris HaKasav. The Torah tells us that has to be the Baal. It can't just be any other person. Thank you to any time.